I'm Lenny LeBlanc, and I'm a songwriter, a recording artist here in Muscle Shoals for about 35 years now. I got my start in music really by accident. I grew up on the east coast of Florida, so we went surfing every day after school. So a buddy of mine and I went to his house. He had a car, so we stopped at his house on the way to my house, and his little brother and several of his friends were sitting around in the living room with their 3 electric guitars. And so they looked at my buddy and I, and they said, "Hey, why don't you guys come over here and sing? One of y'all sing." So I looked at my friend and he said, "No way, I'm not going to sing." He was really shy. And I was too. I'd never been in front of anybody doing anything like that. And so I just went over there just for fun. And I started singing, and they looked at me really funny and they said, "Wow, you sound really good." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, you sound really good." They got excited and they said, "Let's put a band together and enter the talent show at school." So it was junior high. I thought, okay. And so I was so nervous and so petrified. I had my hands in my pockets and my back to the audience. I couldn't even face the people. And oddly enough, we won the talent show. And they got really excited when we won. And so they said, "You need to buy a bass." And I thought, what's a bass? I had no idea what it was. And they said, "It's the big one with 4 strings." I said, "Okay." So I went down to Ecker's drugstore and got a job washing dishes. And I saved up $150. And I went down to the music store and bought myself a Fender bass. We played in that little band, and then I kind of went on and joined other bands. And after about 2 years, I was making a living at it in the clubs. When I graduated high school, I got an invitation to join a band in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I went up there for a few years, and I really didn't like that area of the country that much, and really wanted to change. And so, you know, growing up in Daytona, that's where Greg and Dwayne Allman were from. And so they were kind of peers of mine. They were a few years older than me, but Greg had come to town, Cincinnati, to do a concert, and I hung out with him after, and it was an invitation by him to Macon, because he had just recorded his solo album, and he said, "You know, it's possible you could be in my band when I go out and tour for this record." So I said, "That'd be cool." So I moved to Macon, had a wife and a young daughter, and I stayed there for 2 months. And Greg was not in a hurry to get on do road work on his record, and so Pete Carr, who was another friend from Daytona Beach, who had played in Dwayne and Greg's band before the Allman Brothers. It was a band called the Hourglass. Pete was sort of Dwayne's protege, you might say. So that band broke up, and Dwayne did a short stint here as a studio player in Muscle Shoals. And so I don't know for a fact, but I believe that Dwayne had some influence on Pete moving to Muscle Shoals and being established as a studio player. Because when Dwayne left, Pete came here, and by the time I called Pete from Macon, Pete was already well established here as a session player. I said, "Pete, do you think there's anything for me up there?" And he said, "Yeah, I think you could do really great up here." And so we moved here, and I lived with Pete for like 6 months because I didn't have a job, we didn't have any income. Eventually I got a job working at the State Line with Hollis Dixon in a cover band, and it was about a year before I got my first job as a session player. And it was at Broadway Studios, and Peanut Montgomery, one of the early writers here, gave me my first job on a demo session. And things just sort of took off after that. When I moved here, Pete and I started writing a few songs, and I started meeting some other great songwriters, and it was really a great learning experience for me for the first year, writing with some great writers. And so I really became a better writer. So we wrote a few songs, and Pete had a connection with Jerry Wexler, because Jerry brought a lot of the early acts from Atlantic here. And so Pete sent my demos to Jerry, and 3 weeks later I had a record deal on Atlantic Records. I was like, oh my gosh, it's not supposed to happen like this, but it did. And I'm so grateful it did, you know. Pete, at the same time, was signed to Atlantic as a guitar player, instrumentalist. And so the record label decided, you know, why don't you guys team up together? You know, you play on each other's records, you're friends, you've been around a long time together. And so that's when we formed LeBlanc and Carr. And it was kind of a time when duets were really big. There was Loggins and Messina, and there was Hall & Oates, and duos were really kind of thriving then, you know. So it was a good fit, and we cut a great record together and had a big hit called Falling, you know. After LeBlanc and Carr, we realized that, you know, Pete was more at home in the studio and doing producing, and he really didn't want to go on the road. So there was no sense in doing another LeBlanc and Carr record if we weren't going to tour behind it. So I went back to being a solo artist and signed with Muscle Shoals Sound, Capitol Records. They had a subsidiary record deal, and did a record called Breakthrough with Barry and all the guys. And we had a few chart singles, but nothing as big as Falling. And so it was a 2-record contract, and after the first one came out, they decided to exercise the option. And so I was writing songs for that next record. And a friend of mine that had been to Vietnam, he was like an older brother to me. He had been back for about 4 or 5 years and got into smuggling drugs. So the federal authorities were after him, the state authorities were after him, the IRS was after him, and he got really to the end of his rope, and him and his wife both decided they needed to turn their hearts back to God. So he called me up late one night and said, "Lenny, I got saved, and I'm going to heaven, and I want you to be there with me. Are you saved?" I thought, just when things are going good. You know, at the height of my career, just at a great place, 30 years old, you know. And something in his voice just really hit me deep. It resonated inside of me, and I knew something profound had happened to him. I knew this just wasn't a flash in the pan, that he was some kind of experience he had and was going to, you know, walk away from it 2 weeks later. The Bible really started speaking to me. I started seeing myself in different characters in the Bible, like the rich young ruler that had everything, but he was bankrupt inside, you know, and I saw myself as like the woman at the well. You know, I'd left my family 6 years before, a child and a wife, and my career was number one. It was my God. I worshiped the gift that God gave me. And I saw how empty my life was really. You know, I was well respected as a musician around town, and, you know, had certain fame and was doing well financially, but really I was bankrupt inside. And God started just showing me, you know, my life, really how it was, exposing things, you know, but at the same time revealing His love to me and His acceptance, the way I was. I was trying to write songs for that pop record. I'd start a song out and it'd be a pop song. By the time it would get to the chorus, it'd be about Jesus. And I thought, oh gosh, Capitol's not going to want these Jesus songs. And they didn't. But I lost all desire to do the other. I really wanted to write songs about this God that changed my life. And so it was a terrible career decision, because Capitol just put me in suspension of my contract. So that's where you can't record for anyone else unless they buy your contract. And they wanted $30,000. Christian record labels wanted to sign me, but they couldn't afford to. So I went for 2 years without a record deal, and I lost just about everything. My income went to zero. So I'd sell a guitar, sell this, sell that, sold my truck, rode a 10-speed for about 10 months. I never missed a bill. God provided for me. I struggled. My friends thought I was completely mad for doing that, but it wasn't like, you know, you can't do this pop music because now you're a Christian and it's just not right. It wasn't that at all. I don't see anything wrong with doing pop music or country music, you know, and being a follower of Christ. But for me, it was just I knew God had something different for me. Eventually, you know, I've been able to write songs that have been sung in many languages that are known around the world, you know, and I never dreamed that'd be possible. And along the way, I've had success in country music. You know, with Sawyer Brown, I had a number one in '96. I just got a song on Willie Nelson's new record. You know, we've talked about and heard about the Muscle Shoals sound for years. And I wasn't here in the beginning, but there's a special style of music, I think, that came out of here. We call it meat and potatoes. It's very simple kick drum pattern with a very simple bass line, because the kick drum and the bass that's the foundation of your band. And there was a real focus on that, because when that's right, everything else it just falls into place. And I think that's a key to a lot of the stuff, the early stuff anyway, that kind of formulated what we know as the Muscle Shoals sound.